Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast bringing guests together to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. From entrepreneurs to vendors, higher education to corporate leaders, we'll uncover their perspective regarding the latest trends and technologies impacting your career or business. Our podcast is made possible by Downing EdTech Consulting, where people and technology connect. Hosted by Cher Downing, an experienced executive spanning a higher education and corporate career with specific focus on the EdTech industry. Dr. Downing is also an international and national presenter, author, and regular media contributor. Now here is your host, EdTech strategist, Dr. Cher Downing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast where we bring guests to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. Our goal is to provide you with options for products, services, and knowledge that can help benefit you or your business. I'm Cher Downing, your host, and I want to introduce today's guest, Nancy Taylor, who is the CEO of Taylor Educational Advocacy. Hi, Nancy. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Cher. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm excited to talk with you today because educational advocacy is really a phrase that is just indicative of where EdTech came from. We're always looking at how do we improve? How do we make education and learning better? How do we service the people that are out there? So I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your background and yourself, and then how you've gotten into the work that you're doing now.
Sure. So I was a school psychologist and school administrator for many years. And I did watch as technology has certainly evolved over the life of my career and was always very drawn to it. So I love your thought of how it's something that we advocate for, because we certainly do. I made the decision that I could better support families and support my own entrepreneurial spirit in going out on my own and doing educational advocacy. So my definition of advocacy isn't a term that's a protected term, like being a school psychologist or a clinical psychologist. So it's a role that can be done by people with law degrees, or parents can do it. There's no training requirement. I do it approaching it from a clinical and educational perspective and my many years of experience in working with schools. So my approach with my families is I want them to ensure their children get what they need while still being able to enjoy being a part of the school community that their child is a member of, because it's a super special time of life. Families, I look back on that time with my children, and families really enjoy the concerts and the class parties. When there's situations where there's a lot of conflict in meetings and unpleasantness, I feel like people lose something there. And I want them to still get what their kids need, but also still enjoy those very wonderful family experiences.
And that's a great example, because I think as a society, when you become an adult and you work and people say to you, what do you love about your job? Most of the time people say the people around them, or they had great memories of events that happened or things that went well and all, but they never talk about things such as meetings and areas that are difficult. We're trained to really enjoy the process. And when we can't, we kind of push that off to the side, and it really can be impactful to us. Tell us a little bit about, how do students qualify to work with you and their families when they start with you?
So families typically find me, referrals to me come from other clinicians or people who do evaluations, or from other families. And when families speak with me, we do a quick call and see if we suit each other. I let them see if I can solve their problem for them. I listen a little bit and I tell them a little bit about me. Then I sit down with the parents and meet with them and get a good sense of what's going on. And then I always meet with the kids, because I wrote about this last week in my blog. One of the things that I think is most important for kids is for the adults to get their point of view. I don't like it, and I don't see it as valuable when people do things to kids. I met with a wonderful student today who has some reading issues, and I walked through with the student an understanding of why it was important to get help. I don't think people always do that enough. And then we decide what's next. I get advice on other interventions. There's kids that I follow through for interventions, and some of the time we're going to the school and certainly negotiating and navigating to get kids what they need there.
Absolutely. And that's a fascinating point that I think everyone needs to take to heart, which is we never want to push anyone when we're teaching and learning and when we're identifying people that maybe have less skill set or difficulty in an area. We never want to make the decision for them, and we never want to push them in a direction. We want to help them understand what the direction is and the value of moving forward. And oftentimes in education, we forget. We have quotas to move people forward and to get them into certain locations, so to speak, after a time period. So I think that's really valuable information. Talk to us a little bit about, obviously, looking at the entire ed technology piece and how you feel the work that you're doing fits into all of that. And then what's a little bit about your past experience in the ed technology field, because you're one that gets to be able to enjoy both areas of having that singular client-based look, but also that broader ed tech outlook.
Yes. So I think I need to do, if you don't mind, the history first. So I was always very drawn to technology, and it was described by one boss as a tech maven. I could always see the value in the efficiencies you could find in technology. When I was working to schedule a meeting, was somebody going, well, does this time work, for about 10 people, and going back and forth. And so I wrote up directions for the secretary that was doing it and gave her access to my Outlook calendar, and didn't play that game anymore. So, and there were years when they didn't have a training that was specific for me. So I took time to learn. I did an in-depth personal study, and then in the allotted time to do a study of Word and the more advanced functions of that, Excel. I even did Access, if you can imagine, and PowerPoint. I've always seen the value of having those tools to organize. In my later years in school, a couple things happened. We had more assistive technology, which is technology that can support kids with learning needs. Dragon, naturally speaking, was an early one. There's devices that were very expensive at one point in time, and now they've got great, simple technology for communication, augmentative communication devices for children. So I had an opportunity. I worked with a wonderful woman who was our assistive tech person, and learned a great deal from her. But we also had, and I think this is a piece for people who aren't in education, it happens across industries, proprietary technology that we had to learn to use. Those packages that run pieces of the business. So there was one that was developed for the individual education plans that I, as a director special ed, I had to make all the decisions about who had access and how things were going to be laid out, what we would put where. And that was just, there's other examples, but that's one that Sure. schools use. So when I came to this role, I came to it with a mindset that I was going to find a way in my business to use technology to work for me. And I did quite a bit of research. I tried to, as a new business owner, be thrifty because there's so many cool products out there. I found that I could do quite a bit with a G Suite business, which I think is switched to Workplace is their new title.
Yes.
And again, was able to translate. I had been an administrator for another product. So looking at the administrative platform for that, I was just like, oh, okay, and figured it out. So I was able to generalize it, but I also was able to identify I really wanted to have those kinds of tools. QuickBooks. There's things you can set up in that. Again, for me, technology is a way to promote less error in my own work and more efficiency. With kids, do you want me to talk about that, or should
Absolutely.
I keep going? Okay. So with students, the technology has exploded in terms of accessibility, I think dramatically, that there's so much available on general platforms that used to be big arguments in school because it was a lot of money. So software that used to cost a lot, Dragon, naturally speaking, which was a complicated tool when it first came out to use, I now can go on my iPhone and push the microphone button, or go on Google, open a doc and say, yeah, I'd like to talk, please. I have to push a button. But so I try to my very best to stay ahead of that. And I'm like such a geek. I try to watch the Apple keynote addresses that come out, or at least if I can't get to sit and watch them, I run to see what's going to be and what was going to be in 14 this year. And I'm always trying to teach my kids. So yesterday I had somebody and she's like, oh, I'm really sorry. My computer keeps dinging. We were talking. And I said to her, what kind of computer are you on? She's like, a Mac. I'm like, do you know how to do not disturb? And I taught her how to do it. So, I think there's two things with technology. You're giving something that makes it better in the moment, but you're also teaching when I'm talking about it with them, you're teaching how to solve a problem.
And that is so true. So one of the things that, we talk about on the podcast, because we have a lot of our listeners who are entrepreneurs, new to the EdTech startup world, those are two of the key areas that we always talk about. Is the short-term gain is there's better improvement and consistency when you use software and tools that support what you're doing, whatever project that may be. But the long-term is what are you solving? So, what are the gains from long-term solutions in doing that? And I think that's true of anyone that's running a business, anyone that's starting a particular project, anyone that's working even on their own information, grad students. There's always a short term and a long term in terms of working through, your master's and your doctoral programs. So those are definitely words of wisdom for them. I want to go back and talk a little bit about, you were talking about looking at proprietary software. And so for many of us that have worked in K through 12 or have worked in higher ed or even worked in corporations, there's always a proprietary enterprise system that's in place, and it doesn't always fit what's needed. You kind of make it work. I can remember the joke always was, well, we bought the main package, but we didn't buy any of the pieces that we really needed to make us successful. Talk a little bit about your experience in working in systems and working with those types of tools. And what are some of the things that you came up against when it wasn't able to do what you needed?
So I'm trying to think. I would say the system that they use in schools to track data for students, we were able to get in line for other reports that we might want. So what I haven't told you is that my husband is a reporting data architect. So I have a probably much larger than average understanding of data, of complex relational databases, because that's dinner time conversation here.
Sure.
And my son is a recent RPI grad and works for MathWorks as a software developer. So mostly what I feel like when you say that is the frustration I had then and now that I can't get software to do whatever I wanted. My dream software is the one where I can just say, Siri, can you write me a program to do this thing I'm thinking of? I think you just had to do it yourself, really. Mm-hmm. Like we had the software that we used for IEP writing, and the goals were terrible to start with, and they've gotten better over time. But you have to evaluate what is the point where you can't depend on the technology and you have to do it yourself. And I was never somebody who could just write a goal that was not a good goal. I would have to go, this isn't going to quite cut it, and take the time and reword it. So I think that's what I would say is you have to then look at the piece where the computer stops and you have to still do the work yourself.
And I think you're absolutely right. And we're still seeing a lot of that. It gets better every day. I think artificial intelligence and virtual reality are starting to have more acknowledgement to our requests. And I think we are going to get to a point where we will be able to say one day, just out loud, what it is that I need to pull or what I need to look at. But it's not quite there yet. And obviously, everybody wants something different for lots of different reasons. And that brings me to, because everything that you work with is specialized and confidential. So do you have concerns about getting to a point where people have a little easier access to the data, but does that put that a little more in a security risk?
So I thought about that up front. And I think that's something, if we're going to talk about people going into a business, is they do need to, as they're beginning their business, think about, from a security standpoint, what are you going to do? And who do you feel like you can trust? And what's the research you can, or the accompanying data that they have? Google, actually, I called Google and I grilled them, quite honestly, on their business account and the encryption. And the same with QuickBooks before I would work with them. So the Google, when you have a Google business account, it has a higher level of encryption than your personal account, which is why I put it in a business account, was because I was, yes, very mindful of private information. And I set my website up to be HIPAA compliant, or my back end, my Google site to be HIPAA compliant. And you have to not only consider that from the virtual perspective, but from the four brick walls perspective as well. So yes, I think that the credit cards are the other thing that I think probably across almost probably every business out there, you really have to be thinking about how are you going to safeguard your very private information. Yes.
It's an amazing time because things are moving so quickly and we have so many alternative methods for payment. At the same time, it's so very, very quick and easy. So we look at encryption, we look at doing lots of security, dual authentication, all of these things. The hardest thing I think we still are up against is just bad habits. Last winter, one of the last trips that I was able to take before COVID, sitting in an airport and hearing someone behind me talk on the phone, which was a cell phone, but ordering something and giving their credit card number and their, security number and their, expiration date, all the things they always ask you when you're buying something. And I sat there and I thought of that. I thought, I wonder, is anyone sitting here writing this down? Because you had all of the information instantly. You didn't have their name necessarily, but for a lot of online websites, that's, you can make up a name and then fill in the rest. So habits are still difficult for us as human beings.
So I have done a couple things on that. So I for about the first year and a half, it was just me. So I only had to trust myself, and that seemed pretty easy. I hired someone, my wonderful assistant, Indy, and she, part of the reason that I hired her, knowing that we had sensitive information, was for her ethics and values. So I think that's another thing for people. Who you hire is very important. And I wrote procedures for us. So we meet at least weekly as new things come up. She is pretty clear on when this is a good time, and she's very I'm very blessed. She's super observant of this herself, that she should check in with me. But she writes procedures now. So what we've done, so part of Google is you can do what's called canned responses and in your Gmail. So I taught her how to do that. She customizes them for everyone, but she has a starter for some of the functions that she does more regularly. So that's another effective, efficient, to me, use of technology that works really well for us.
Absolutely. That gives you the opportunity to oversee the type of communication that's going out. It also, efficiency-wise, just from a time perspective, she's not reinventing the wheel every single time she needs to respond to something or trying to remember what did we do in a particular situation 6 months ago. That's something that I think for startups in particular, and I know our listeners, for many of them, that's a difficult thing. You're a one-man shop or one-woman shop, and in the beginning, you kind of do everything and you keep track of everything. But as you start to grow and as you start to really recognize where the time value is best spent for your skill set and your expertise, it's often not in answering preliminary emails and setting up appointments and ordering things, but the messaging and the brand still has to be acknowledged there. It still has to feel that it's coming from you because it's representing you. And so that's valuable information for folks, because I think often we forget, we think, oh, we'll get somebody free. I've heard stories when I work with EdTech startups who say, well, we got an intern from, high school or from the college. Well, to stuff flyers into envelopes and to fill boxes and all, that's fabulous. But if they're handling your PR and you have a professional brand, that may not necessarily be the right fit. So I think that's so important. What are some of the kinds of things that you can share with us that maybe you have her do that fit into really taking that technology forward in not necessarily maybe working with your clients, but in working in other spaces? What are some of the things that she handles that really fit into that?
So we're a paperwork heavy organization because I know that the most important things that solve problems are data and relationships, which perhaps sound antithetical, but people need to feel safe. They need to feel comfortable. But they also need to feel like you know what you're talking about. And using information sources to guide practice and give us information really helps. So she does the scheduling. So we have, again, through Google Calendar access, we have all the paper that comes in. She files all the paper. We have a system set up. There's a function that it's an add-on through Google that you can use called Team Drives that we use in order to organize all the information that we have. And we just have a system. We joke our birthdays are one day apart. That when you put two Virgos in the room, two things happen. We both go, "Was that okay with you?" a lot, and we're both really very perfectionist in that we have plans. So we're probably lacking the alternative viewpoint sometimes, but and I think something that I've taught her over time is to be. She would say to me, "Oh, you know all this technology stuff," and I said, "Well, I know how to Google." So I will, if I don't know how to do something, I'll just go, "I wonder if this works," or sometimes I'll just look at what are Google Chrome extensions to see what's out there for fun, because, that's my life. You probably think that sounds very normal.
Yes, for me it does. But I know for some of our folks, it's a new world for them.
So I'll find something and I'll think about it. I have a question for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
One of the things that I'm really intrigued by are integrations.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been a little bit reticent from the security perspective. Zapier is a company that comes front of mind to me, and I've kind of followed them, and I've done a little bit of their free plan. What do you think in terms of the efficacy of some of those, but also the security?
So one of the things that really has come to the forefront has been security in the last few years. And so for many of them, you can actually go out to their sites and you can pull their security certifications and you can see up through the federal government level how far they have moved in terms of having not just security in the short term, but what happens for the repercussion when it does occur. I always tell people, never believe that anything is 100% foolproof. It just isn't going to happen. There's always going to be something, because there's always someone out there trying to break the system. That's, for some people, breaking security is to have gain, whether that's monetary or other value. But there are people that just enjoy the hunt, and they just want to try to break into these companies purely for the sake of doing it. The amount of pings that a company gets on average during the day is in the hundreds of thousands of people just testing them, just trying it, just what if. I tell people, on the simplistic idea is, think about when you walk up to a door and you don't know if it's locked or not. Even if someone says to you, oh, it's locked, what do? You grab the doorknob and you turn it, because you're just curious enough to know, is it really locked? Or do they just think it's locked and it might open? That is the basis of hacking. That truly is, for a lot of them, what it is. So for me, the integrations have to have that level of security that they've gone through, and the protocols are easily available and accessible to review. And I'm more interested in, what's the backup plan? What's going to happen when your product fails? Because if I have 3 or 4 things integrated together, I'm probably more than likely not going to be able to pinpoint the exact moment one system failed and another system picked up. So what's more important to me is what's going to be done about it, and what's going to step forward as a protective service. This comes from, if you look at basic intellectual property backgrounds, it's more about protection on the end of the person who is responsible and owns it, not necessarily who is actually publishing it or pushing it forward. And there's a reason for that. It's so that you do have that opportunity for rebuttal, and you do have that opportunity to have a policy in place of what to do for it. So personally, I like integrations. I use a lot of integrations. I do like to know that they have been in the industry for a while. I do like to know that they have been out, that some of the bigger companies are using them, because that assures me most of the big companies aren't going to use somebody that just started. Also, that means that they are financially stable enough that I'm not going to start to rely on them and they're going to close shop tomorrow. And as you know, we've seen a lot of products come and go in the last 10 years because everyone was anxious to get out there and get their apps out and do all of these things, and then didn't have the forefront to support it.
I think it's tantalizing in some ways as an entrepreneur, because you're definitely courted with all these things as a new business. If you click on anything, everybody has their get on our emails and free trials. And you really have to, I sat early on and I continue to monitor like what percentage of my budget is going to technology. And I made the decision for the business that I have, I didn't want to use like a Calendly for scheduling, because I didn't feel that fit my business model.
Sure.
Which is, there's nothing wrong with it, but you have to be careful, because you could, it's just like everything else. It doesn't seem like it's like all the TV platforms. How many of them are you really watching? Or they're happy to keep taking your $6, $10, $20 every month. And especially when you're starting, you definitely want to be super lean.
So one of the things that I always tell folks that are starting out in business is to annually do a sweep of your apps. If you're an iPhone user in particular, Android is now getting up there, but for a long time, apps were really solely focused towards Apple products. They're very easy to download. And what you may not notice is that you're paying for one, or that there's an annual fee. And because your iPhone is attached to a credit card, it automatically renews. And the one I always use for an example is exercise apps. January comes every year and everyone's going to lose weight. They're going to get in shape. They're all excited. And they download app after app because they try one and they don't like it and they move to a different one. And then usually by March or April, people give up the ghost and go back to living life and decide they're not going to be totally in shape. But they don't get rid of the connectivity to the app. They may delete it off their phone. That does not mean they're not still getting charged for it. So, I tell people you have to do an audit of yourself just as much as you do of everything else in your business. What have you downloaded, said you were going to try? Mark your calendar. If it's a 30-day trial, mark it so that on the 25th day, you have time to stop and go, am I really using it? Have I even tried it? I really don't want to keep this going. You have time to cancel it. Everyone always says, well, in 30 days, they notify you. Well, sure, they notify you at the last minute and you're in a hurry or you're busy and you say, oh, I'll just leave it. So you're absolutely right. Being lean is so important, but also understanding when there's, and it's always crazy for me to say this, but when there's too much technology, when you've branched out so much that you can't manage all of the things that you're using, especially for a small business, when there's one or two of you and you've got way too many things you're trying to keep track of, it makes it so difficult.
Andy's good at that because I see something and think it looks fun. And she's like, that seems like just another thing to look at. Like, how is that really going to change things? And when it's two of us, she's probably kind of got a point. So, I think that's something for people to remember. I think I was really lucky to be in a school district where the superintendent gave us, all the administrators, an iPad, and he told us he expected us to be experts by the next year and to be teaching everybody else. And I think it's important as an entrepreneur to have that mindset of empowering your staff with technology. So empowering them to customize it in ways that work for them. Indy had something she didn't know last week. And I'm like, oh, do you want me to explain it? She's like, nope. And she came back and she's, now I'm an expert, because she's learned the method. That's part of, as a leader, as a boss, you really want to have people be in a place where work is fun and exciting and they get to try new things. And it isn't just, you being the thought leader. From the business perspective, certainly I need to be in the subject matter, but there's lots of ways people have ideas about technology. Is a great opportunity to give them that buy-in, the motivation for them.
And I think also, having that external voice. And I always recommend, obviously, if you pay someone, they have a vested interest in your success. I don't recommend having someone that, is in your family or your best friend, because you get sometimes a kind of a gray area there in terms of them. How much do they say to you honestly, and how much do they have concern over saying things? But when you have someone, even if you hire someone to come in and do an audit. So we did an audit recently for somebody and we looked through all the things that they're using and why they're using them. And we talked through ultimate goals. Boy, if I knew how everything worked, here's what I'd want it to do. And by the time we got to the end, there's a lot of things that they had on board that they really didn't need. They had another product that when they bought it didn't do that. But as products grow and they add more services, it's like, it's a constant moving thing. And there's no issue in my team saying to you, here's our recommendations. If you choose to do it, you're going to save some money and some effort. And if you choose not to, well, we, recommended this and what's coming. At some point, you're going to have a possible bottleneck or a catalyst of doing this. I think when you're small and you start out and you're just one or two people, it's still important to have that person that will say to you, is this really a good idea or should we be doing this? Even for myself, I have a virtual assistant and she will say to me, is this really the month we want to start this? Because I see shiny things and I'm like, ooh, this could be fun. And then reality sets in and I'm like, no, you're probably right. This is not the month to start that. So why would we start the 30-day free on a month when we have absolutely no time to look at this? So it's always a learning mechanism for us individually as business owners. But as we bring people in, bringing in the right people that help really not only navigate through the processes, but help us look at through fresh eyes is just really valuable.
Well, and I think I have to say too, the people that you're exposed to, you and I met through a course, and it's a group that is very inspiring, and you being one of those members. as I thought about, is after we decided I was going to do this with you, I've started posting weekly. And one of the things that I'm posting about is technology. So I'm posting, I call it a tech tip, and they're not anything major. But yesterday I was meeting with a student and she told me her Mac was making noise when we were talking. And she's like, "Oh, I'm really sorry. That happens in school too. And I feel bad." And I taught her how to do not disturb, and she didn't know how to do that. So I'm like, wait, I have to write this down because it's going to be my tech tip next week. So I'm not doing anything. This week's tech tip was Grammarly. And again, I see it as I've been using that as I blog. I do it so that I can, I don't like to tell kids, go try this if I haven't tried it myself. So I've been trying it to see, is it really worth it? And that to me, it's a great one. So,
yeah, Grammarly is one of my favorites as well. Listeners, if you've not checked it out, please do so. You can write and type right into the screen. It will edit for you. So it will point out when you're doing spelling errors, grammar errors, missing commas, all the things that come with good writing. And you can set your writing style if you're writing for a professional paper versus you're just writing a blog, or you're writing maybe a one-page executive summary. So it will also give you the type of tense to use and what might be a better term to use. Perhaps we all do this when we write. We use the same format and organized words together. One that I always remember is people will say "as well as," and then in the next paragraph it says "as well as," and they start using it every paragraph. It will come up and suggest, as a thesaurus does, a different term that means the same as there as, and it can replace it. So it's very helpful.
The regular writing is my new personal professional goal, I guess, and I tend to say very and really a lot. I probably do when I speak and I don't realize it as well. And it's beating it out of me. Like I was very proud this last, the post that went up today, there was only one in it. So I was very excited.
For me, having been an academic for so long, I tend to write as an academic. And when you want to push out a blog or something that's not necessarily casual, but not as intense as an academic piece, you tend not to use the same type of terminology and level of words. And so it's very helpful to kind of back me out of being that intense academic writer. It's been really helpful. But I think also it makes you learn as you're working through your process.
And for everybody who likes awards, it does have there's a game piece to it too. So, I think I didn't realize I was getting them till yesterday, and I got my statistics of, how many words I've written in how many weeks and kind of some of the problems that I have. Am I getting better at them? So, and then you think about it as an educator, and I want kids to learn and grow. It's a tool that gives them feedback. That's one of the things I find really valuable.
So that's a really good example of, finding a technology that has dual purpose. There's a learning component. There's a need component because you're preparing something to go out to an audience. And I think that's something that's so valuable when you're looking in your, considering technology is how many things can you get out of it? How many things can it do for you? If you were using it so that you could write better, but you still had to cut and paste your material out and move it somewhere else to actually write it up, it wouldn't be valuable. It's one-stop shopping in the sense of being able to do that. So, I always encourage people, look at all the facets, even if you don't know how to use all of them yet, but it's something that if you can learn in it, then you can obtain it and you can really make it worth the purchase.
And I think it speaks to kind of to your point earlier of some of the larger companies. What you're talking about is it now is a Google Chrome extension. So the product that I probably pay the most for is my QuickBooks, but it's been very valuable because I can have an accountant hooked to it. I can I have many things within it automated, so there's not a ton of direct time that's needed. And as there's, ever a need for reporting out of it, even for refinancing our home, I'm able to go in very quickly. So there's also to your point of what you spend money on, sometimes it's worth spending it to end up with something that, yes, that's not I think there definitely are probably less expensive solutions than that, but it's such a good product that it's kind of worth it to, and I had someone teach me how to set up those automations early on. So I don't ever have to put in, and I have my credit card processing through that. So I don't ever have to, there's very little I actually have to do to it.
It is. And a product like QuickBooks, this is something else you need to look for. QuickBooks offers a lot of classes that you can take as an end user to learn how to do certain things. They also have a track line of learning how to work with your accountant or your HR person or your tax person, so that you're understanding how the system works and how what you're inputting is going to affect what outputs to them. So QuickBooks has looked and said, it's not enough to learn just the accounting side of it. You need to be able to understand all the facets. And so we're going to teach you all of it so that you can make this a full use product. And those are the kinds of things where if they're offering training and teaching, and it's good training and teaching that is easily understandable, that you can have access to at any time, that you can rewatch as many times as you want, that's really something worth investing in.
There are also, with some of these products that are ones that are going to cost you more, it's often to set them up, there's a time that you need to initially talk to somebody. And it's really valuable. I had another product I was working with at the same time as Google, and their tech support was terrible. And Google was like, these guys were like, I was a multi-million-dollar client, the amount of attention they would give me to explain this as a business customer. So when you do have a business account, it's different than if you have a Google question with a personal free account. Good luck to you. With a business account you're paying for, QuickBooks, I can get on and they'll share screens with you. So they really will help you.
Absolutely. And those are all things that are so important to look for. So Nancy, as we start to wrap up today, what are a couple highlights that you really want people to know about your new business as you've gone off into doing your own system and but still having those relationships and connectivity with parents and kids in the whole overall kind of school spectrum? But what are some highlights that we can know about your business?
So I think the reason for my business, to me, when I say this to parents, it always makes sense, is it's not that people in schools don't have good intentions. Their goal is to move a band of children forward positively. And if your child is in that band of success, they see it as success. And that's not necessarily what we're looking for our children. Parents are looking to optimize outcomes for their children from a wellness perspective, from a success perspective, from an achievement perspective. And working with somebody who like me, who understands schools, who can handle the conversations with schools in a way that's positive and supportive, really has value. I love what I do. I love the parents I work with, and I love the kids. You're definitely getting, if one of my parents were to listen, they would be like, wow, Nancy, I would never have thought like you put all this thought into all these things. That's just kind of, they should, because that's what I do for their children. But I think that's sort of, to listen to me talk about the way I've talked about, like the amount of energy that I put into calling Google and, harassing about their encryption. That's what I do for my families.
And that's fantastic. People that have a passion for what they do, it often bleeds over into other areas. So for you, it's the passion of calling Google isn't just because of the product, but because of the outcome and how it affects the people that you work with and the people that rely on you and trust you. And that's so valuable. As our listeners are out there today, think about the fact that you are, whatever product you're selling, whatever service you're giving, there is a level of trust in a relationship that comes with any client in any company. And you have to respect that, and you have to share with them why it is that you're doing what you're doing. That's the most valuable piece. So that's just fantastic. I'm going to ask you now what I ask everybody as we wrap up the end of the session, which is, what is your prediction for EdTech as we're going forward in the next few years?
Oh gosh. So I have to go bigger than EdTech first. I have to say I've been following quantum computing, and I think that's going to affect everything. And I was reading something, of course, because I prepared for this. I was looking at futures, and I saw that it looks like there's potential for us to see some potential changes in the next 10 years. I think it's going to affect us from a security perspective in a concerning way. But I can't necessarily imagine all the things that we're going to see. I think if I look at it from an EdTech perspective, and I'm going to then go to the level of my niche, is I think some of these things for kids are going to, I hope, translate to more personalized learning. I would love to see the value the thing that I see for kids, and Grammarly is a great example of that in the way I talked about it. You can use it as a tool to look at, my stats. How am I getting better at this? That's where I don't think we're ever going to get away from in the near future with computers, the right-brained connection that teachers make with students, that the things that computers can't do, the decisions that need to be made. But there is more and more programs. IXL is one that schools use, where kids are getting more immediate feedback. I look for that to happen more. I would love to see it happen with writing more. I think writing is an area kids could really use more immediate feedback. And Grammarly to me is at least a start. It needs to go beyond that, but it's a start.
Absolutely. And it's interesting when you talk about quantum computing, because one of the things that they talk about right now is as you said, we're moving forward in it, and it's going to change what we define security as. But I think back to in the mid 70s, when we suddenly one day said, oh my gosh, we have a security breach. Everyone walks around carrying their social security card and uses their number on absolutely everything. And we can't have that. This is a huge problem. And they immediately phased out using that number for almost everything. It came down to very pertinent personal data, but everything else moved into some form of an ID number. And we always hit these waves of where the security is and where our concerns are. But at the same time, it's always been the same thing, which is something is out there that allows someone to access things I don't want them to access. So I think as we move forward, quantum computing is going to change a little bit of how we view security as well. And that's going to bring about probably things we've never even thought of. But at the same time, it's also going to encapsulate some of the things that we worry about right now.
Isn't that so exciting? Things that we've never even thought of. Like, what a wonderfully amazing time to live, though, that the things that my iPhone can do that it could do that I didn't even understand 10 years. I'm not sure I had one 10 years ago. I might have just gotten it. And now I just think it's so exciting. I plan to be 90 and still saying, did you Google it? Might not be Google anymore, but, I, every once in a while, at this point in time, can outgun my children, which know something they don't know. So that makes me happy. In terms of some new feature, I've already tried it out. So that makes me excited. I'm going to stay that lady the rest of my life.
Well, I agree. And I think we're just on the cusp of learning things, but we're also now reaching a point where our audience doesn't remember a life without technology. The last of the folks who were born totally before technology was ever even an idea are unfortunately getting quite up in age. And for those of us in our age group, we lived half our life without and half our life with. But I think most of us have become easily adopters to it because we figured out the benefits of it. Somebody posted the other day, a friend of mine had a birthday, and she said, I'm amazed now at what you can do with a cell phone. She said, and I remember it used to be so exciting when I could talk on the phone and I would stretch the cord so I could sit in the closet and talk in privacy. She's like, and now you just walk out of the room and you can immediately have privacy somewhere. So
my mother never had a computer till she was close to 80. And she learned how to use it. And she just, exactly what I'm saying. So I have a high standard set for me. I think the world's going to be lucky to have you and I share, though, because the history is going to be important and there's relevance to that. Certainly things are easier, but there are the consideration of the security and the mindfulness. I thought your description of integrations was wonderful. Those are things we have to, having that breadth and depth of experience of it is very valuable.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think as we move forward, we're going to see more of those kind of discussions where we are bringing together the new ideas and the things that are going forward, and then the things that we have learned, hopefully, over time, or the things that we at least need to take into consideration. So this has been a wonderful conversation today, Nancy. I'm so excited that you joined us. I want to thank you for being on air with us today. This is just great. How do people reach out and get in touch with you? What is your website?
So my website is tayloreducationaladvocacy.com.
Nice and easy. And we'll be sure and include that in all of our podcast promotional information. I want to thank all of our listeners for attending EdTech Speaks today. We really hope you enjoyed this episode and can make use of the information. We look forward to having you join us again. If you're interested in hearing other podcasts, please listen to us. We're available on Amazon, Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher. You may also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and visit our website at www.downingedtech.com. Until next time, keep learning.
Thank you for listening to EdTech Speaks with EdTech strategist Cher Downing. To learn more about the services Downing EdTech and its staff can provide you, find us at www.downingedtech.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it. We'd also like to hear from you regarding any suggestions for topics or guests and the value you received from our show. Check back for new podcasts with featured guests at www.downingedtech.com/podcast.